Miranda. Now, a rabbi, a priest and a Buddhist monk walk into a bar. What a wonderful and heartwarming example of a multi-faith society. If only the real world had such a positive punchline. Unfortunately, recent events in Paris and fluctuating reports of increased anti-Semitism across Europe show that society still has some way to go despite this week's moving commemorations at Auschwitz. So that's why we've decided to put being Jewish in this week's Spotlight. This week marked 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. For the handful of survivors, the horrific memories remain fresh and painful, and they were joined at the former concentration camp on Tuesday for a moving memorial to those who were killed.
We survivors do not want our past to be our children's future.
Indeed, recent events act as a stark reminder that anti-Semitism hasn't been consigned to the history books, not least the murderous attack on a kosher supermarket in Paris earlier this month. And this week, the Labour leader Ed Miliband underlined the lingering threat while warning against hyperbole.
The vast majority of people right across our country are, incredibly decent people who would be as appalled by anti-Semitism as Jews in Britain are too.
Whereas actress Maureen Lipman expressed her own concerns. When the going gets tough, the Jews get packing, she told listeners to LBC this week, claiming a rise in anti-Semitism may force her to leave the country. So, a time for reflection, remorse, remembrance, not just for Jews, but for everyone, and a time to consider just how much the horrors of the past still echo in the present. And we're joined by Esther Rantzen. Welcome to our programme. Do you think, 70 years is a time, obviously a figure, an anniversary to commemorate, but do you think that the events in Paris, there were events in Brussels as well, there have been an increase in anti-Semitic attacks in this country too, did that give the commemoration of Auschwitz an added poignancy, an added importance?
Not for me. I see no synergy, it doesn't seem in any way parallel to me. Of course, all racial terrorism is appalling, whoever it's against. And I feel as strongly about anti-Muslim feeling, anti-Arab feeling, anti-black feeling as I do about anti-Semitism. What happened in Auschwitz was different. And what we learnt from the Holocaust, I think, was terribly important. And unlike Maureen Lipman, who's a friend, I feel completely comfortable in Britain. But more than that, I feel deeply grateful to be in Britain. So I found the week really poignant for a different reason, because not only was there the Auschwitz memorial, but also the memories of Churchill's state funeral. And once again, I mean, I'm just so aware that if Churchill hadn't provided the leadership and the country hadn't risen to his extraordinary exhortations, I certainly wouldn't be here. My family would not be here.
So what do you make of Maureen Lipman's comments that the rise in anti-Semitism in this country, she's talking about, not just in Europe, but is making her think about leaving the UK?
Well, I'll be frank. I think it's incredibly insulting to Britain. I respect so much about the institutions here, about the culture here. They talk about fair-mindedness it may be old-fashioned, but it's true. I mean, when you put, and God knows I know this, when you put a good cause in front of the British public, they rise with compassion, with understanding, and with a desire to help.
So you don't feel that there is a rise in anti-Semitism in this country, a discernible increase in it? You don't feel that?
I feel there is a rise in religious polarisation. I think it's dangerous. I hate fanaticism on either side.
And you can see that in the attacks on the mosques as well as attacks on
Absolutely.
synagogues. And
Absolutely. And what really I find so frustrating is that Arabs and Jews are Semites, you know? We come from the same part of the world. We have so much in common with each other. And the truth about humanity is the future for our children is to live alongside each other and tolerate. Look at this sofa of two people who tolerate each other and enjoy their differences.
Well, but we do have to
Just about.
sedate them first, though.
Well, I've noticed that.
Otherwise, they'll be knocking spots off each other. How did you think the commemoration of Auschwitz resonated with contemporary events this time?
Well, I thought all the commemorations were incredibly dignified, and because it's 70 years, when it's 80 years, most of the people who are commemorating it are survivors.
There were still some survivors.
So it's extraordinarily important in that respect. But otherwise, I must say, I think I agree with every single word that Esther has said. And maybe just to add that in some ways, I think there has been a reduction in anti-Semitism. Well, when I was a child, it was quite common to say, you know, that's a golf club that doesn't take any Jews. I mean, I'm not well informed about these things, but I suspect that that sort of attitude is much diminished if it exists at all today. On the other hand, because of what's happening with Islamic extremism, I think there is quite a lot of anti-Muslim feeling. And if we were going to be preoccupied at the moment about prejudice against a minority in this country, I think I would put higher in the league table of my concern what people feel about Muslims at the moment than what they feel about Jews. But of course, I agree with Esther, you know, that any of these conflicts is highly undesirable. Jews are in the position, not only in this country but elsewhere, of being identified with Israel, and it is true that Israel is becoming, I think even now, increasingly unpopular. I don't say that that is justified, but I think it is a fact. And some people will make a translation between the political positions of Israel and Jewish people in general, although I think in Britain, very, very rarely does that lead to something that you could describe as anti-Semitism.
It is said that as the remaining survivors die off, that it lacks poignancy. But I very much doubt that, because, first of all, the event itself is still there to be commemorated, and we have their testimonies on tape. I was watching the Eichmann show, the BBC, on the filming of the famous Eichmann trial. The survivors testified then. That is a living monument forever.
We have to make sure that that doesn't happen. You know, we from the kind of baby boomer generation who were close to what happened in the war, and so we grew up hearing what happened, you know, on our doorstep, not in some faraway place in Germany. The fact 6 million people were killed, not just Jews, of course, gypsies, trade unionists, all kinds of... And the people who are anti-Semitic are usually anti-loads of other things. I think Jonathan Sachs said this week, no free society was ever built on hatred, and it is hatred. So we have to keep the Holocaust Day
A very
alive.
brief final thought from you, Esther, on this week of 70 years of Auschwitz.
My memory, my mind goes to my godmother, who was Jewish. She joined the Quaker Relief. She drove an ambulance into Belsen, one of the first civilian parties there. And what she saw, she never told me about, but I know was traumatic. And for me, that is what Jews do. They try and bring people together. Imagine the Quakers welcoming this Jewish woman to drive the ambulance. We need to work together, and this is a fantastic country, and anything we can contribute is important.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you. That's your lot.